The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace as tourists began gathering for the daily changing of the guard ceremony. Among them was 9-year-old Lucy Martinez, clutching her mother's hand tightly as they made their way through the growing crowd. Lucy had been looking forward to this trip to London for months. Her father, Sergeant Rodriguez, was deployed overseas with the army, and her mother Carmen had saved for over a year to bring Lucy to see the famous royal guards that her father always talked about in his letters. Mira. Lucy Carmen whispered in Spanish, then switched to English. Look, sweetheart. Those are the guards your papa told you about. Lucy's eyes widened as she saw the magnificent, uniformed guards standing at attention. Their tall black bearskin hats made them look like giants, and their gold buttons gleamed in the sunlight. She had seen pictures. Seeing them in person felt magical. They looked just like the toy soldiers Papa sent me, Lucy whispered back. Remembering the small figurine that sat on her dresser at home, the crowd continued to grow as the ceremony time approached. People pushed closer, everyone wanting the best view and the perfect photo. Carmen held Lucy's hand tighter, feeling uncomfortable with how packed the area was becoming. Standing at his post near the palace gates was Royal Guard Daniel Thompson, a 26-year-old who had been serving for 4 years. Daniel took pride in his duty, maintaining the stoic silence and perfect posture required of all guards. He had learned to tune out the noise of tourists, the constant camera clicks, and the occasional attempts by visitors to make him react. But today, something felt different. The crowd seemed more aggressive than usual, with people shoving past each other for better positions. Daniel noticed several parents struggling to keep track of their children in the chaos. Near the front of the crowd, Lucy was beginning to feel overwhelmed. The adults around her were much taller, blocking her view completely. She could barely breathe with so many people pressed against her small frame. "Mama, I can't see anything," Lucy said, tugging on her mother's jacket. Carmen looked around desperately. She had promised Lucy this special experience, but the crowd was becoming dangerous. People were pushing from behind, and she could feel herself losing her grip on her daughter's hand. Behind them, a group of rowdy teenagers were shoving their way forward, laughing loudly and pushing anyone who got in their way. They seemed oblivious to the families with small children around them. "Move it, lady," one of the teenagers shouted at Carmen when she didn't step aside fast enough. "Please." "I have a small child," Carmen replied politely, trying to protect Lucy from the pushing crowd. "Not our problem," another teenager laughed, giving Carmen a hard shove that sent her stumbling forward. Lucy lost her mother's hand in the chaos. Panicked, she tried to call out, but her small voice was drowned by the noise of the crowd. She found herself separated from Carmen, surrounded by legs and bodies, unable to see anything but the backs of strangers. Meanwhile, one of the teenagers, showing off for his friends, decided to test the famous composure of the royal guards. He had heard that nothing could make them move or react, and he wanted to prove it to his group. "Watch this," he said with a cruel grin. Moving toward Daniel's position, Daniel saw the teenager approaching, but maintained his disciplined stance. He was trained to ignore distractions, no matter how annoying or inappropriate they might be. The teenager started making faces, rude gestures just inches from Daniel's face, trying to get a reaction. When that failed, he began making loud noises and waving his arms dramatically. Other tourists noticed what was happening and started taking videos, some encouraging the disrespectful behavior. The situation was escalating, but Daniel remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Lucy, still lost in the crowd, was getting more frightened by the minute. She tried to squeeze between people to find her mother, but everyone was focused on the spectacle ahead and barely noticed the small girl struggling among them. In her panic, Lucy pushed forward too quickly and stumbled. As she tried to regain her balance, she accidentally bumped into an elderly man with a walking cane. The man, startled and unsteady, swung his cane defensively without looking. The heavy wooden cane struck Lucy across her shoulder and arm, sending her tumbling to the ground. Lucy's scream of pain and fear cut through the crowd noise like a knife. It was the desperate cry of a frightened child, alone and hurt. calling for her mother in a language that transcended words. The sound hit Daniel like a physical blow. In 4 years of stoic service, he had never heard anything that penetrated his professional composure so completely. Every instinct he had as a human being told him that someone small and innocent was in trouble. For a split second that felt like an eternity, Daniel faced the most difficult decision of his military career. Daniel's training screamed at him to maintain position. For years of discipline, countless hours of instruction, and generations of military tradition demanded that he remain motionless. Royal Guards did not break character. They did not abandon their posts. They did not react to civilian disturbances. But Lucy's cry of pain wasn't just noise, it was the sound of a child in genuine distress. The elderly man who had struck Lucy with his cane was now aware of what had happened. His face filled with horror as he looked down at the small girl on the ground, clutching her shoulder and crying, "Oh my God. I'm so sorry," he stammered, reaching down to help her. "I didn't see you there, sweetheart. I thought someone was trying to grab my wallet." Lucy was too frightened and hurt to respond. Tears streamed down her face as she looked around desperately for her mother. The crowd continued to press around them. Was people unaware that a child had been injured in their midst? Carmen heard her daughters scream from somewhere in the crowd, but couldn't see where it came from. She began pushing frantically through the masses of people, calling Lucy's name in both English and Spanish. "Lucy, Lucy, where are you?" Carmen's voice was filled with panic. The teenage troublemakers, still focused on trying to provoke Daniel, remained oblivious to the drama unfolding behind them. One of them had escalated to making physical gestures near Daniel's face, while his friends recorded everything on their phones. "Come on, robot man," the teenager taunted. "Don't you have any feelings at all?" Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was someone mocking him for having no feelings while a few feet away. A child was suffering and needed help that only he was positioned to provide. Lucy tried to stand but stumbled again, her shoulder throbbing from where the cane had struck her. She was small for her 9 years, and the adult-sized crowd felt like a forest of giants looming over her. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crowd noise. Daniel's eyes remained fixed straight ahead, but his peripheral vision caught sight of the small figure on the ground. Every paternal instinct he possessed was screaming at him to help. He thought of his own niece, who was about Lucy's age, and how he would feel if she were hurt and alone in a crowd of strangers. The elderly man was trying to help Lucy, but his own mobility issues made it difficult. "Someone help this little girl," he called out. But his voice was weak and easily drowned out by the surrounding chatter. A few tourists noticed the commotion, but most were too focused on getting the perfect photo of the guards or watching the teenager's disrespectful display. The modern phenomenon of everyone being more interested in recording events than actually responding to them was on full display. Carmen's frantic searching became more desperate as she pushed through the crowd. "Please, has anyone seen a little girl? She's 9 years old, dark hair, wearing a red jacket." Some people shook their heads sympathetically. Others ignored her completely, too absorbed in their own tourist experience to be bothered with someone else's crisis. Daniel could hear Carmen's desperate calls, and his trained ear had identified the direction Lucy's cry had come from. He knew exactly where the injured child was, and he could see that no one was effectively helping her. The teenager in front of him was now making crude jokes about the guards' uniforms, his behavior becoming increasingly obnoxious. His friends were laughing and encouraging him, treating the sacred duty of the Royal Guards like entertainment. "I bet they're not even real soldiers," one of the friends said loudly. "They're probably just actors in costumes." Daniel's hands, hidden beneath his white gloves, clenched into fists. Not from the insults to his service, he had heard worse and ignored it all, but from the frustration of being unable to help someone who desperately needed. Lucy's crying had quieted 2 soft whimpers, but Daniel could see she was becoming more disoriented. The combination of pain, fear, and being separated from her mother in a foreign place was overwhelming. For a child her age, the elderly man was still trying to help. But other tourists kept jostling him, making it impossible for him to provide meaningful assistance. "Someone needs to help this child find her mother," he pleaded to anyone who would listen. A security officer was slowly making his way through the crowd, but he was still several minutes away from reaching Lucy's location. By Daniel's calculation, it would take too long for official help to arrive. Then something happened that made Daniel's decision for him. One of the rowdy teenagers, emboldened by his friend's laughter and the lack of any reaction from Daniel, decided to physically touch the guard. He reached out and flicked Daniel's ceremonial bayonet, a serious breach of protocol that could have resulted in immediate arrest under normal circumstances. "Look, I touched him and nothing happened." The teenager laughed triumphantly. But Daniel wasn't looking at the teenager anymore. His eyes had moved to Lucy, who had tried to stand again and was swaying unsteadily on her feet. The crowd was closing in around her, and Daniel realized she was about to be trampled by people who couldn't even see her in that moment. Daniel made a choice that would change everything. Without warning, Daniel broke from his rigid stance. In one fluid motion, he stepped away from his post and moved through the crowd with the precision and authority that only years of military training could provide. The crowd parted instinctively before him, shocked to see a royal guard in motion. The teenagers who had been taunting him stumbled backward in surprise, their phones still recording, but their expressions changed from mockery to amazement. He moved. One of them whispered in disbelief. The guard actually moved. Daniel's focus was entirely on Lucy. He knelt down beside the small girl, his imposing figure suddenly gentle as he assessed her condition. His tall, bearskin hat cast a shadow over her, providing a momentary shield from the chaos around them. "Hello there, Daniel," said softly, his voice kind but authoritative. "Are you hurt?" Lucy looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. The magnificent red uniform and towering hat that had seemed so magical from a distance now provided comfort rather than intimidation. There was something in Daniel's voice that made her feel safe. "My shoulder hurts," Lucy whispered, still clutching the spot where the cane had struck her. "And I can't find my mama." "I'm going to help you find her," Daniel said with gentle confidence. He carefully examined her shoulder without moving her, his training in first aid evident in his methodical approach. "Can you move your arm a little bit for me?" Lucy winced but was able to move her arm, indicating that while painful, the injury wasn't severe. Daniel nodded with relief, then stood to his full height and did something that stunned everyone present. He lifted his voice in a commanding shout that cut through the crowd noise like a sword. Everyone stopped moving. A child is injured and separated from her parent. The entire area fell silent. Hundreds of people froze in place, shocked by the authoritative command from someone they had assumed was merely decorative. Daniel's military bearing and unmistakable authority made even the most unruly tourist comply immediately. In the sudden quiet, Carmen's voice rang out clearly. "Lucy, where are you?" "Mama," Lucy called back, her voice carrying in the silence that Daniel had created. "Keep calling to each other," Daniel instructed, his voice now carrying across the hushed crowd. "Everyone else, please step back and create a clear path." The crowd began parting like the Red Sea, with Daniel's presence and authority making it impossible for anyone to ignore his instructions. People who had been pushing and shoving moments before now moved respectfully aside. Carmen appeared through the gap, a tear streaming down her face as she saw her daughter. "Lucio, mi amor." Mother and daughter rushed toward each other, reuniting in an embrace that brought tears to the eyes of many witnesses. The elderly man who had accidentally struck Lucy approached them, his face filled with remorse. "I am so terribly sorry," he said to Carmen. "I didn't see her there. I thought someone was trying to rob me, and I reacted without looking." "Is she badly hurt?" Daniel remained close, monitoring the situation. "The shoulder appears to be bruised, but not seriously injured," he reported to Carmen. "However, I recommend having her checked by a medical professional to be certain." Carmen looked up at Daniel with overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you so much." "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't helped her. It was my honor," Daniel replied simply, his formal training evident even in this emotional moment. The crowd around them had not dispersed. If anything, more people had gathered, drawn by the unprecedented sight of a royal guard breaking protocol to help a child. Many were filming, but the atmosphere had changed completely from the earlier chaos. "Lucy," still holding her mother's hand tightly, looked up at Daniel with admiration. "Are you really a royal guard?" "Yes, I am," Daniel answered, a slight smile breaking through his formal demeanor. "My papa is a soldier too," Lucy said proudly. "He's fighting far away, but he told me about brave guards like you." Daniel's expression softened even further. "Your father sounds like a very good man, and you are a very brave little girl." A security officer finally reached them, having pushed through the crowd. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, then did a double take when he realized he was addressing a royal guard who was clearly away from his assigned position. Daniel straightened. Knowing he would have to face the consequences of his actions, the child was injured and separated from her parent. The situation required immediate intervention. The security officer looked at Lucy, still clinging to her mother, then at the crowd of witnesses who were watching the interaction with rapt attention. He could see in their faces that something significant had occurred here. "I'll need to report this," the officer said quietly to Daniel. "I understand," Daniel replied. "But first, could you ensure this family gets medical attention and safe passage out of this crowd?" The officer nodded, impressed by Daniel's continued focus on the welfare of others despite knowing he likely faced disciplinary action. As medical personnel arrived to check Lucy's injury, the crowd remained unusually quiet and respectful. The teenagers who had been causing trouble earlier had disappeared, apparently realizing that their behavior seemed petty and cruel in contrast to what they had just witnessed. Lucy's shoulder was deemed bruised but not seriously injured. As her mother prepared to take her for proper medical evaluation, Lucy turned back to Daniel one more time. "Thank you for helping me," she said simply. "You're the bravest guard in the whole world." As Carmen and Lucy were escorted to safety by medical personnel, Daniel prepared to face the consequences of his unprecedented actions. He returned to his post, resuming his formal stance. But the atmosphere around him had changed completely. The crowd that remained was no longer the chaotic mob from earlier. People stood quietly, respectfully, many wiping tears from their eyes. The disrespectful behavior that had been escalating throughout the morning had been replaced by something approaching reverence. An elderly woman approached Daniel's position and placed a small bouquet of flowers at the base of his post. "Thank you," she whispered, then stepped back without trying to get his attention or make him react. Others followed her example. Within minutes, flowers, small gifts, and handwritten notes began appearing around Daniel's position. Children who had witnessed his kindness toward Lucy now looked at him with wonder rather than trying to make him move or smile. Word of what had happened spread rapidly through the crowd and beyond. Social media exploded with videos and photos of the moment. Daniel broke protocol to help Lucy. Unlike typical viral content that focused on spectacle or controversy, these posts were filled with admiration and respect. Royal Guard breaks centuries of tradition. To help injured child, read one caption that was shared thousands of times. "This is what a real hero looks like," wrote another. Meanwhile, at the palace administrative offices, reports of Daniel's actions were reaching the highest levels of command. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the officer in charge of guard protocols, received multiple urgent calls about the incident. "One of your guards abandoned his post during ceremony," reported a palace security chief. "But ma'am, you need to hear the full story before taking any action." Colonel Mitchell listened with growing amazement as she heard the details. In 23 years of military service, she had never encountered a situation quite like this. Protocol had been broken, but the circumstances and the public response were unprecedented. "Bring Guard Thompson to my office immediately after his shift," she ordered, "and get me a full report from security, medical personnel, and witness statements." Back at his post, Daniel maintained his professional demeanor, despite knowing his career hung in the balance. He had made his choice in that split second when Lucy needed help, and he would accept whatever consequences followed. The other guards on duty had witnessed everything, and their respect for Daniel was evident in subtle ways that only they could recognize. A slight nod from a colleague, a barely perceptible adjustment in posture that conveyed solidarity. The Brotherhood of Guards was expressing their support within the strict confines of their duty. As the afternoon progressed, the story continued to spread. News outlets picked up the social media posts, and reporters began arriving at the palace, hoping to learn more about the guard who had chosen compassion over protocol, Dr. Sarah Williams, who had treated Lucy at a nearby medical facility, called the palace administration to provide her professional assessment. The child's injury was minor, but she was in genuine distress and potentially dangerous situation, she reported. The guard's intervention likely prevented a much more serious incident. Carmen and Lucy, after Lucy's shoulder was properly treated and bandaged, returned to their hotel. But Carmen couldn't stop thinking about the kindness Daniel had shown them. "Mama, will we see the nice guard again?" Lucy asked as her mother helped her settle for a nap. "I don't know, mi amor," Carmen replied honestly, "but we will always remember how kind he was to you." Carmen sat down and began writing a letter. Her English wasn't perfect, but her gratitude was profound, and she wanted the palace to know exactly what Daniel's actions had meant to their family. "Dear Sir or Madam," she wrote carefully, "today your guard Daniel saved my daughter from being hurt worse and maybe stepped on by big crowd. He was so kind and gentle with Lucy when she was scared and hurt. My husband is soldier fighting far away, and he would be so proud to know there are guards like Daniel protecting people. Please don't punish him for being good person and helping child who needed help." The letter went on to describe Lucy's admiration for the guards and how Daniel's kindness had made their trip to London unforgettable for the right reasons. By evening, Colonel Mitchell had received over 50 similar letters, emails, and phone calls from witnesses to the incident. The unanimous message was clear: Daniel had acted with honor, courage, and compassion in extraordinary circumstances. She also received a call that surprised her more than any other. Colonel Mitchell: "This is Margaret Windsor from the Palace Press Office. I understand you have a situation with one of your guards that's generating significant public attention." "Yes, ma'am." Colonel Mitchell replied carefully, "I've been instructed to inform you that certain members of the royal family have become aware of today's incident." Margaret continued, "They would like a full briefing on the matter tomorrow morning." Colonel Mitchell felt her heart rate increase. Royal family involvement could mean anything from commendation to court-martial, depending on their perspective on protocol versus humanitarian action. That evening, Daniel sat in his quarters writing his own report of the incident. He was honest about his decision to break protocol, explaining his assessment of the situation and his reasoning for acting as he did. "I understand that my actions violated established procedures," he wrote. "However, I believe that failing to act would have violated the higher principles of service and protection that our uniform represents. I accept full responsibility for my choices and any consequences that may follow." As he sealed the report, Daniel reflected on the day's events. Regardless of what happened to his career, he knew he had made the right choice. The image of Lucy's frightened face and her grateful smile afterward would stay with him forever. He had spent 4 years learning to be the perfect soldier, following orders without question and maintaining discipline above all else. But today he had learned something even more important about what it truly meant to serve and protect. The next morning, Daniel reported to Colonel Mitchell's office at precisely 0800 hours. His dress uniform immaculate and his bearing perfectly military despite the uncertainty of his situation. He had spent the night preparing for the possibility that his career as a royal guard was over. Colonel Mitchell studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Thompson, in 23 years of service, I have never encountered a situation quite like yesterday's incident." "Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied. "Standing at attention, I've read your report, reviewed security footage, and interviewed witnesses," she continued. "I've also received more than 100 letters, emails, and calls from members of the public praising your actions." Daniel remained silent, knowing that public opinion didn't necessarily influence military discipline. "Tell me, Thompson, in that moment when you decided to break protocol, what went through your mind?" Daniel considered his answer carefully. "Ma'am, I saw a child in distress who was in immediate danger. No one else was in a position to provide assistance quickly enough. My training as a soldier includes protecting civilians, and my duty as a human being required that I act. Colonel Mitchell nodded slowly. And you understood the potential consequences? Yes, ma'am. But I believed the consequences of not acting would have been far worse. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Colonel, the palace representatives have arrived, came the voice of an aide. Send them in, Colonel Mitchell replied. Daniel's heart raced as 3 individuals entered the room. Margaret Windsor, from the press office, Lord Chamberlain, Sir Richard Hartley, and most surprisingly, Lady Catherine Pemberton, a member of the royal household who rarely involved herself in guard matters. Good morning. Guard Thompson, Lady Catherine said warmly, her voice carrying the refined accent of aristocracy but with genuine kindness. I've heard quite remarkable things about your actions yesterday, your ladyship, Daniel replied with a respectful bow. Sir Richard stepped forward with a formal document. Guard Thompson, we've conducted a thorough review of yesterday's incident. Your actions, while technically a breach of protocol, demonstrated exceptional judgment and embodied the highest values of service to crown and country. Daniel blinked, uncertain he was hearing correctly. Lady Catherine smiled. Thompson, did you know that among the letters we received was one from the family you helped? The little girl asked her mother to write and request that you not be punished for being kind. She pulled out Lucy's drawing, which Carmen had included with her letter. It showed a stick figure in a red uniform with an enormous hat holding hands with a much smaller figure. At the top, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Thank you, Guard Daniel," with hearts drawn around the message. There's more, Margaret Windsor added. The incident has generated international media attention, all of it positive. The story is being framed as an example of the compassion and humanity that exists within military tradition, sir. Richard opened the formal document. Therefore, by order of Her Majesty's household, you are hereby commended for exceptional service in the protection of civilians. Your actions yesterday will be noted in your permanent record as exemplary. Conduct under extraordinary circumstances. Daniel felt his knees nearly buckle with relief and surprise. Sir, Thank you, sir. There's something else, Lady Catherine said with a smile. We've had a special request. The little girl you helped, Lucy, has asked if she might visit the palace properly. Her father is deployed overseas with the military, and this trip to London was apparently quite special for her family. Colonel Mitchell spoke up. Thompson, you're being assigned to provide a private tour for Lucy and her mother tomorrow morning. Consider it part of your official duties. It would be my honor. Ma'am, Daniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. Later that day, the official palace statement was released to the media. The Royal Guard's primary duty is the protection and service of the realm and its people. Guard Thompson's actions yesterday perfectly exemplified these values. The palace commends his quick-thinking compassion, dedication to protecting those in need. The statement went viral, with news outlets around the world picking up the story. Comments poured in from military personnel, parents, and citizens praising both Daniel's actions and the palace's response. Finally, a story that shows what real heroism looks like, wrote one commenter. This guard represents the best of military service strength. Discipline and humanity, wrote another. That evening, Daniel called his own family to share the news. His parents wept with pride as he described the events and their aftermath. Son, we always knew you were special, his father said, his voice breaking with emotion. But this shows the world who you really are. Meanwhile, their London hotel, Lucy was beside herself with excitement about the upcoming palace visit. Mama, we get to see Daniel again, she exclaimed, carefully moving her bandaged arm. And he's going to show us the whole palace. Carmen smiled, still amazed by how the trip she had saved so hard for had become so much more than she had ever imagined. Yes, mi amor. And your papa is going to be so proud when we tell him about our brave friend Daniel. The story had reached Lucy's father as well, through social media posts shared by fellow soldiers. Sergeant Rodriguez had written a heartfelt message to the palace, thanking Daniel for protecting his daughter when he couldn't be there himself. As one soldier to another, his letter read, Thank you for showing my little girl what true honor looks like. You have my eternal gratitude and respect." That night, Daniel looked at Lucy's drawing, which he had been given a copy of, and reflected on how much his life had changed in just 24 hours. He had thought he might lose his career for breaking protocol, but instead he had discovered what his service truly meant. He had spent years learning to stand perfectly still and ignore distractions. But yesterday, he had learned that sometimes the most important action a guard could take was to move towards someone who needed help, regardless of the rules that said he should stay in place. The next morning, Lucy arrived at Buckingham Palace wearing her best dress and a bright smile. Her arm still in a sling, but her spirits soaring. Carmen held her daughter's good hand as they were escorted through the private entrance, both of them amazed that they were about to receive a personal tour of the palace. Daniel was waiting for them in the courtyard. This time in his dress uniform, but with permission to speak and interact normally. When Lucy saw him, her face lit up with pure joy. "Daniel," she called out, running toward him as fast as her injured arm would allow. Daniel knelt down to her level, his formal demeanor replaced by genuine warmth. "Hello, Lucy. How's your shoulder feeling today?" "It still hurts a little, but the doctor said I'm very brave," Lucy replied proudly. "Mama says you got in trouble for helping me." "I'm sorry," Daniel smiled, touched by her concern. "Actually, Lucy, the opposite happened. I got in trouble for being good, which means I got praised instead of punished. Your letter helped make that happen." For the next 2 hours, Daniel provided Lucy and Carmen with the most comprehensive palace tour either of them could have imagined. He showed them the staterooms, explained the history of the monarchy, and shared stories about royal ceremonies and traditions. Lucy was fascinated by everything, but she was most interested in learning about Daniel's daily life as a guard. "Do you really stand still for hours and hours?" she asked as they walked through the grand hall. "Sometimes," Daniel admitted, "but the hard part isn't standing still. The hard part is deciding when it's more important to move. Like when you helped me," Lucy said with understanding beyond her years. "Exactly like when I helped you," Daniel confirmed, in the throne room. Lucy stood in awe of the magnificent chairs where kings and queens had sat for centuries. "Daniel, do you think someday I could be brave enough to protect people like you do?" Daniel knelt beside her again, his voice serious and encouraging. "Lucy, you're already brave enough. You were brave when you got hurt and didn't give up looking for your mama. You were brave when you wrote that letter asking them not to punish me for helping you. Bravery isn't about being big or strong. It's about caring about others and doing the right thing." Carmen watched this interaction with tears in her eyes, thinking of how proud her deployed husband would be to see their daughter receiving such wisdom from someone she clearly admired so much. As their tour concluded, Lucy had one final question. "Daniel, will you write to my papa? He's a soldier like you, but he's very far away. I think he would like to hear from another guard." "I would be honored to write to your father," Daniel replied solemnly. One soldier to another. Before they left, Lady Catherine Pemberton appeared with a special surprise. "Lucy, we have something for you," she said, presenting the little girl with an official palace gift bag. Inside was a miniature royal guard uniform, sized perfectly for a 9-year-old, complete with a tiny bearskin hat. Lucy gasped with delight, immediately putting on the hat, which comically covered most of her face. "Now you can be an honorary royal guard," Lady Catherine explained. "Someone who protects others by showing them kindness and courage." Lucy stood at attention, saluting Daniel with her good arm. "Honorary guard Lucy, reporting for duty, sir." Daniel returned the salute with perfect military precision, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "It's an honor to serve alongside you, Guard Lucy." The story of Lucy's palace visit was shared through official channels, and images of the little girl in her honorary guard uniform became symbols of hope and resilience around the world. But the impact of the original incident continued to resonate far beyond the media coverage. Daniel's actions had sparked conversations about the balance between duty and humanity in military service. Military academies began using his story as a case study in ethical decision-making under pressure. The palace established new protocols that gave guards more flexibility to respond to genuine emergencies involving civilians. Most importantly, Daniel's example inspired other service members to remember that their ultimate duty was to protect and serve people, not just follow rules blindly. 6 months later, Lucy's father returned from deployment to find his daughter transformed by her experience. She'd become a junior volunteer at their local children's hospital, reading to younger patients and helping families navigate the sometimes overwhelming medical environment. She says she learned from her guard friend that protecting people comes in many forms. Carmen explained to her husband, sometimes it's standing strong and silent, sometimes it's moving to help, and sometimes it's just being kind to someone who's scared. Sergeant Rodriguez wrote another letter to Daniel, this one expressing his amazement at how his daughter had been inspired to serve others. You didn't just help Lucy that day at the palace, he wrote. You showed her what it means to be a guardian for others. That lesson will stay with her for life. Daniel, who had been promoted and given new responsibilities for community outreach, kept Lucy's drawing on his desk. It served as a daily reminder that the most important moments of service often came not from following orders, but from following one's conscience and choosing compassion over convenience. The wooden knight that Lucy had made for him in art class sat beside the drawing, another gift from a child who had taught him that true strength sometimes meant breaking tradition to do what was right. Years later, when people asked Daniel about the most important day of his military career, he never hesitated with his answer. It wasn't the day he graduated from guard training, or the day he first stood post at Buckingham Palace, or any of the ceremonial occasions where he had protected visiting dignitaries. It was the day a 9-year-old girl taught him that sometimes the most courageous thing a soldier can do is abandon his post to help someone in need. Daniel continued to serve with distinction, eventually becoming an instructor who trained new guards, not just in protocol and procedure, but in the judgment required to know when humanity must override regulations. His story became part of the official training curriculum, ensuring that future generations of guards would understand that their duty extended beyond standing at attention. Lucy grew up to become a pediatric nurse, dedicating her life to caring for children in their most vulnerable moments. She kept the honorary guard uniform from the palace, and whenever young patients asked about it, she would tell them the story of the brave guard who taught her that protecting others was the highest calling anyone could have. The bond between Daniel and Lucy's family remained strong through the years. When Lucy graduated from nursing school, Daniel was there in the audience, wearing his dress uniform and beaming with pride as she received her degree. You know, Lucy said to him afterward, you saved more than just me that day at the palace. You saved the idea that following orders and following your heart don't always have to be different things. Daniel smiled, remembering the frightened little girl who had become this remarkable young woman dedicated to helping others. You taught me that too. Lucy, you showed me that real courage isn't about standing still when someone needs help. It's about moving toward the people who need you most. The story of the royal guard who broke tradition to help a crying child became a testament to the power of compassion over protocol, proving that sometimes the most important rules are the ones written in our hearts rather than in any manual. It reminded the world that true service means protecting not just buildings and ceremonies, but the vulnerable people who need someone to stand up for them when they cannot stand up for themselves.